Welcome back to Sheep Stuff You Should Know. Unfortunately, Dan Macon's not here today. He's up in Truckee herding sheep on a mountain. But today I'm able to welcome back Joe Fisher, veteran broadcaster and bull raiser extraordinaire. And we got a newbie to the group too, Jeff Clark from Amy Livestock. So why don't we just start off, Jeff, if you want to just give a quick introduction as to who you are and what you do and how you're not a sheep man.
Sure. So at Not a Sheep Man on Instagram, that's my first plug for Instagram here. I'm sure many on the show, but no, I'm fortunate enough to work for Amy Livestock here. My title, you would say, is breeding herd division manager, but we all, everybody in the company contributes to everything we do. So I just have a lot of fun working with our guys every day and doing our best to keep the operation moving forward. What we do, or what I do on a daily basis, is work with our crew out in the field and manage our breeding flock of ewes and cattle here at Amy Livestock. And I guess there's so many things that kind of fall under that title and what I do that it's it's kind of hard for me to think right now and name all of them, but I work closely with Ryan in regards to genetic selection, in regards to everything from labor to ranch improvements. I mean, we all work together on everything, but there's as you all know, if you operate on any sort of rangeland operation, you're running 100 miles an hour every day, going a million directions, and that's part of the fun.
Perfect. And Joe, welcome back. You want to say hi and tell us what you've been up to the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, but I was waiting for the introduction that said back by popular demand. Unfortunately, it was framed like back because Dan's in Truckee, which I'm okay with generally. Yeah. But it's back by popular demand, right?
No, not quite.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's what I figured.
By moderate demand. Back by moderate.
Necessity is a wonderful motivator, isn't it?
It is.
For those of you that didn't tune in last time, I manage an outfit called Bruin Ranch, broadcasting live from the bunker, which is my 13-year-old's bedroom. Actually, Zoom has changed our world here, so the kids are on a violin Zoom meeting, of all things, 3 hours long. You guys might get to hear some of that audio. Hopefully not. Hopefully there's plenty of quality audio coming through. If not, just give me a signal or something. Run this Angus operation, about 300 mother cows in the foothills here in Auburn. We'll run as north as far as Loma Rica. And then just recently, we're able to run all of our cattle here in this valley for the summer. In the previous years, we've gone as far as Gardnerville, Nevada, gone as far south as Valley Springs. We kind of just like to stay in the foothills. We feel like that gives us the best area to develop our genetics for our commercial customers. And we're obviously really passionate. If I were to just sum up our operation, it's about matching your genetics with your environment, and it's maximizing the pounds of beef that our customers can produce on the range that they're working within. And some of those have really lush pastures, some have really rough pastures. But chances are, if we hedge our bets and run our cattle in a fashion that's fairly what we think is trying to the genetics, then we've covered our bases for our customers.
That's awesome. Well, that kind of was a good segue into the topic today. Typically, we banter for a half an hour, but and then maybe talk seriously for a minute or two. But today, I think we'll flip that a little bit because I got to. I consider you guys experts in the field of genetics, especially in the cattle side of things. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is basically how you make informed decisions using genetic data. And in the sheep industry, this is a very new thing. The data banks, the genetic banks that are used to develop these EPVs are fairly new. They don't have a whole lot of data points, but that also creates opportunities, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. So I think just to start, a good place to start, I would like to start with definitions. And so I'll just start tossing it over to Jeff real quick on, you want to just maybe define when we say genetic tools or data, what that means, what those tools that are available for, and kind of what they are and how they're used, and use the cattle example because that's where they're really developed.
Sure. In fact, I was thinking back to my introduction. I didn't really let on to this, but I've only worked with sheep for the past 4.5 years. My background was in cattle, and that started, as a teenager, and then went on when I was in studying animal science at Cal Poly and working for their beef operation there. And then as I got out of school, I worked for JBS, Dry Rivers Cattle Feeding for a while, purebred outfit, and then landed here. So anyway, I did want to add that in so you kind of get my background, because when I came in and started working with sheep, I was fully a cowman with a cowman's background, looking at the sheep enterprise with completely kind of new eyes. And so the first thing I noticed getting into the sheep business was the opportunity that I saw for genetic improvement. If we started to utilize some of the tools we're about to talk about. So some of those tools Ryan was asking about are EPDs or EDVs. They're the same thing, but it's an expected progeny difference. So on the cattle side, a commercial producer can arguably make the most improvement in their herd by utilizing the EPDs, which are numbers in a database that is managed by, let's say, the Angus Association or another breed association. And that database is comprised of actual performance data from recorded progeny from specific animals. They take all of that data and they can manage it in a way where they can quantify the production traits that these animals' progeny have expressed and put it in a usable format for you to go and compare two sires, let's say, for various traits. And you can look at sire A and expect sire A's weaning weight to be, on average, 30 pounds greater than sire B, and vice versa. There's many traits that you can do this with, but just taking that data and throwing it all into a database where everything is compared across an even table is probably the most valuable tool that I see out there for a commercial producer to make improvement at this point, is utilizing those EPDs in your sire selection. Along with that, though, you got to know, where your end market point is in order to even know where to start with these EPDs. I would say identifying that, that end market point is probably the first thing that a producer would need to do. Joe, you want to add on to that a little bit?
If I were to add one thing, Jeff, and Ryan and I talked about this, Ryan and I talked about this about a week ago when we were spitballing this little segment, just kind of throwing ideas out. We really need to be careful to not dive into the weeds too far. And so if any of you have questions too, I think, did we discuss that you can send Ryan an Instagram note or something like that, or am I falling off the rails? Is that okay, Ryan?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're not live, but yes, they can DM me at California Sheep Rancher, and we want follow-up questions. They can also email us at sheepstuffousshouldknow, EWE@gmail.com.
And that's a good segue too, to say that depending on the reviews of this, which we're at risk here, some of this material can get a little dry. But if there's follow-up stuff we need to address in subsequent podcasts, we could talk to the host and the creator and see if that's a point that we want to discover. But if we keep this simple, what is the number one reason to use EBVs, EPDs, genomics, all those things? I'd say, Jeff, why should I do that? I know if this ewe's raising a 600-pound combined set of lambs as opposed to 400 pounds, and you can tell I'm not a sheep man, because obviously those numbers don't work. But proverbially speaking, it's to take environment out of it. That is what we do. It's so that we can select genetics from different regions around the country or around the globe, integrate them into our program, and have the level playing field Jeff was talking about. If Amy Livestock is weaning 800-pound steer calves, can they make improvement by using bulls from me that have weaned off their mothers at 600 pounds? Well, that's not really comparing apples to apples, because we haven't taken management and environment out of the equation. And that's what EBVs and which evolved into EPDs and now genomics have allowed us to do. So I think let's just keep heading on down the road of your definitions. But the whole underlying thread here is EPDs, EBVs, genomics. The value behind it is so that we can compare livestock on an equal playing field and take environment and management out of the equation.
So you want to touch on genomics, what the difference between those are from EPD?
So genomics and EPD is the different. Yeah, I mean, that's probably something that I'm going to answer in cowboy terms. Scientists would probably have some qualms with it, but that's okay. I don't always agree with the scientists. EPDs were created by basically just ratioing cattle. And when I say ratioing cattle, or livestock is what we should say on a show like this, it was you take the average of your cow herd and let's say you weaned those contemporaries or animals born within a 90-day period and then run under the same management. You take those animals, average their weight, and let's say it's 700 pounds, and one calf would weigh 770 pounds. Well, that calf would weigh 10% on average higher than would weigh actually 10% heavier than the average animal. Subsequently, a one that weighed 630 would be 10% under. So the one that was under, we would say ratioed a 90 or 10% less than average, which would be 100, and the other one would ratio 110. And by factoring in those ratios, they were able to say that on average, these animals will produce this much more with respect to that environment. What genomics did actually, and obviously I'm dumbing this way down, mostly because I'm not qualified to talk at any higher level than I am, but also for the sake of the viewers and don't want to see your ratings plummet. Genomics actually opened up the animal. And it was when we actually successfully mapped, I think it was a Hereford cow and a Holstein. I may be incorrect, but the whole cattle genome mapping that happened several years ago. They opened up these animals and were able to identify all the genes. Well, through the use of that, coupled with QTLs, which were, I believe, called quantitative trait loci, they were able to see where there were deviations in the chromosomes of these animals, spots that were different for animals with more weight or less weight. And again, I'm dumbing it way down. But by identifying if those animals had that concentration of genes or not, they were able to assign values to those animals. The cool part in Angus now, we have 19 observed traits. And I don't know if we'll just naturally go down some of these roads and we'll riff, and that's the way it is. And like I said, Ryan, you just keep us between the fog lines. But we have 19 traits, and then also we have 7 indices that combine several of those traits, all for selection tools. Of the 19 traits, those are 19 phenotypic observations that we make. So let's define a phenotype before we go much farther. Is a phenotype just what the animal looks like? Of course, but a phenotype is a birth weight. A birth weight is an actual phenotype. A weaning weight is a phenotype. Pounds of milk produced would be a phenotype. Square inches of ribeye area would be a phenotype. Back fat thickness would be a phenotype. If the animal has a higher degree or less degree of marbling, would be an observed phenotype. Those phenotypes feed this computer system, this database that's been created. Then the genomics are also supplementing that back. And in Angus, we now have GEPDs, they're called, which are genetically enhanced EPDs, which is pretty cool because we'll get into accuracies a little bit later. But this is more than theory, although we kind of trend that way. But in theory, you can have animals that once you've taken their genetic information and coupled it with their actual production information and then their pedigree estimates based on what their sire and dams have done in the past, you come up with the most robust predictions of what that animal should be. I've always heard it said, and I'm as much of a critic of our current system as anybody, but the pedigree tells you the parentage. The EPDs tells you what their calves should be. Their genomics tell you what they are. And so when you can take all of those things, you're combining the best data possible. Jeff, I don't want to get too outer stratosphere because what I do is not as applicable to everyone who might listen, but you're a cow man, you're running cattle. How do you find these traits usable and the current database? And how do you wade through all the weeds as a commercial operator, just trying to produce pounds of cattle the most efficiently you can?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in regards to the genomic enhanced EPDs, I'm a big believer in these now. Now, if you would have asked me about them 4 years ago, I don't know that I would have had the same answer. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit later, but I truly believe these genomic tests are getting more and more accurate. And obviously, the more samples that they have to pull from, the bigger the database gets, the more they can hone in the accuracy. But like you and I have discussed in prior conversations, those genomic enhanced EPDs, are basically adding the equivalent in accuracy of 10 to 36 calves given a specific trait. It depends on how well they've isolated, the markers for that specific trait. Like take milk, for instance. I know if you have a genetic enhanced EPD for milk, it's equivalent to the accuracy of that bull having 36 offspring. And this could be a yearling bull, but then take dry matter intake. It's a lot less accurate of a genomic EPD. It's about 12 offspring. So, personally, when I look to buy bulls, I'm looking for genomic enhanced EPDs at this point because I've gone further on the commercial side where we've utilized the commercially available genomic tests for our own cattle, for our heifers. And I've seen through production records in comparison to those genomic evaluations that we've been provided through those tests that they do trend through. They trend as they say, and I'm becoming a lot larger believer in this tool being utilized a lot more. And I think a lot of, even in the Angus industry, you have a lot of seed stock producers still that I speak with that are still very skeptical of this. And I think it's because they look at their own herd and their sample size of the genomic database is this big. They've got so many tests in that database they're comparing it to. So you may have a weaning weight EPD on that one animal that's a 10 and it weaned at, 850 pounds. But if you were to take that genetic profile on 100 calves, you would have them trend, on that lower weaning weight. So I know I've become a big believer in that. And honestly, the one we utilize the most on the ranch is actually in selection of our replacement females, and it's the Genomics Advantage test from Zoetis. And what that does is it's an Angus-based genomic test for choosing replacement females, and it compares your females against all other females in the database. And they have a pretty hefty database now filled with commercial females that they've ran these genetic tests on that are very similar to the purebred genomic test. So if you have a high percentage Angus in your heifers, it's quite accurate. And we utilize that quite a bit, and we'll kind of use it as more of a tool to get rid of the bottom 5% more than anything else. But after tracking that data for the last 3 to 4 years and comparing it to my production data, I can prove that they trend in the right direction, which puts a lot more faith in my book in these EPDs.
So Jeff, I mean, I'm going to probably take the role of disc jockey here for a second and interview you, but I mean, this is sheep stuff you should know. How can we take all this data that can be more easily gathered from individual animals just from a physical standpoint in how we manage cattle? It seems easier to measure individual cows than people think about managing a flock. It seems like when I talk to cattlemen, they talk about cows. When I talk to sheep people, they talk about flocks, and it's more about flock performance. Do you feel like as a producer of sheep, there's some holes and some low-hanging fruit that we can kind of dive into in sheep production?
That's a great question because, as I said, I was new to sheep 4 years ago, and walking into this business, my mind was kind of blown by the opportunity that I saw for improvement. But that being said, I'd say one of the biggest barriers against that push in that direction in the sheep industry specifically is probably the cost and invasiveness of artificial insemination in sheep. You know, the cattle industry has been able to utilize AI and pull the best genetics from all over the world and incorporate them into your herd by buying semen from, you know, bull A in Argentina or wherever it was, and being able to use that rather easily with, you know, a 50% or greater conception rate. Whereas in the sheep industry, you know, it's costly, number one, it's time consuming, and you basically have to perform an orthoscopic surgery in order to AI. And so I believe that's really slowed the genetic progress of the sheep industry. But on top of that, in the US, the lack of available, you know, sires to purchase with actual production. I'm not talking EPDs. I'm only talking production data at this point. There's just not not enough, and not a good enough source, I would say, nationwide. You know, in the sheep industry, we have oh gosh, is it an association? It's not an association, but the NSIP. It's the National Sheep Improvement Project, I believe.
Yeah, National Sheep Improvement Program.
Okay, so basically, what they've done, because these different breeds of sheep are not, you know, they don't have enough membership to have a large association like the Angus Association to manage their data. So the sheep industry actually stepped in and said, hey, we're going to have this, you know, this kind of broad spectrum program where we will manage all the data for all these breeds separately, but they manage the data. They produce EBVs for those breeds to be used. However, it hasn't had the adoption that we've seen in the cattle industry.
I would just make one caveat there, that there are specific breeds. The ones that stick out are the Katahdin breed and the Targhee breed that have embraced those EPVs and have shown tremendous genetic progress. And so just so like
in terms of what, Ryan, when you say genetic progress, I mean, are they weaning heavier lambs? Is there a longer staple length? Is it a higher quality fleece? Like, what are those things that you're trying to
control the genetic direction of your herd? So in the Katahdins, there's been a lot of work done on parasite resistance and different things in that nature. And that has, I mean, it's proven itself out. And then in the Targhee breed, they're able to, there's a wide variety of directions to go with Targhee, but that's because of the utilization of those EPVs, where now you can make clear directional decisions on, do I want to push a fine wool Targhee, or do I want to push a coarse wool Targhee, or do I want, like, what kind of trait I'm after because of where I'm at. So they've done a really good job as an association getting a majority of those seed stock guys to actually commit. But then when you step back, the majority of the sheep in the U.S. are Rambouillets and Suffolks. And so, and those, the associations there haven't jumped into those.
So the breed makeup, you guys have done this on other podcasts and I haven't paid attention, but you guys have a combination of Rambouillet, Merinos, and you use a little Suffolks, or I don't recall.
We call ourselves a traditional Western range sheep. So we're a white face, fine wool sheep. So it's a Rambouillet Merino and maybe a little Columbia influence ewe. And then we cross those with a Suffolk Ram to make a F1 cross market lamb.
And all of those F1s are terminal.
Those are all terminals. Our maternals are all going to be.
So would it be fair to say that if we were to dive in useful EPDs, if you were buying Suffolk Rams, you would be looking at things like loin eye area. You would be looking at other carcass qualities and growth. And if you were looking at the ewes, the white face side, it would be staple length. It would be birth weight, weaning weight. Other maternal traits like milk might be of value. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. And the point I was trying to make is that as a Western range operation too, it is very hard to find enough sires with information available, with even production information, because a lot of these guys have excellent sheep, but they're raising them in a range operation like most commercial operators, and it's very hard to take the kind of measurements to get the data in that type of an operation. So while their sheep are very, very good, it's hard to prove or even benchmark a lot of the performance in most of these seed stock flocks, just because of the logistics of taking the data at lambing or weaning and out, kind of in this big open range where they run. But I would say this, I think the sheep industry has done so well for so long because their seed stock producers run like commercial producers, and those sheep are put through the tests that your commercial sheep are put through. And that honestly, I feel adds more value than any of this stuff, in my opinion.
So this is going to sound just crazy. I'm good at driving us off the rails. You guys know this. Is it fair to say that maybe that's the role of the backyarder guy? Like a guy with 25 head is probably going to do a better job of measuring every single animal and has the time and the resources. And they've always talked about in the Angus database that everybody's fearful of the big guys, but they say the real good data comes from thousands and thousands of small breeders. Where do your big guys, your big seed stock operators that you guys are buying rams from, where are they getting their genetics? They can't just keep line breeding. And if they are, I mean, I would love to see their program, because that intrigues me on a whole different genetic scenario we could talk about. But where are they getting their seed stock from?
I actually think this is a good question for Ryan.
Yeah, so we bought our rams from a couple different producers over the years, and we've been we changed a couple, and everyone's different. We've taken the approach at AV Livestock to kind of build your own information. That's why we got EID tags in our sheep. We got a management software. We track data on our own sheep because it's not as available on the commercial side or on the seed stock side. So we build our own data. There's a lot of challenges with that, but it works. But then the other thing that we've done is we are constantly looking to work with our seed stock producers to develop data information streams. So while that data is being collected, it might not go to NSIP. We're collecting it and we're keeping it ourselves for our own, and we're making decisions off of that stuff. So this last year was the first year we went up to buy our, whatever it was, 12 whiteface rams, maternal rams. I went and I picked out 20, and then he sent me all the measurement data that he had. So he had wool qualities, twins, birth weights, different weight measurements at different times. And then from that, I selected what rams I wanted. And so I was able to select, visually the 20, and then I narrowed it down to 12 by the paper. And we're just constantly trying to improve that kind of a decision. Our philosophy is always to inform decisions with data, not make the decisions with data. We always want to be looking at the sheep and looking at the livestock.
So that's exactly what I say about cattle. I'm sorry to step on you, Jeff. That's what I say. I say with cattle, the numbers should justify the cattle. The cattle should justify the numbers. The numbers shouldn't justify the cattle. Meaning, if they're not good for an operation, it doesn't matter what their predictors say. You need to, as a seed stock operator, you need to cull and move past those and only keep the superior animals. But what are the traits, Jeff? If you're running a commercial sheep outfit in Rio Vista, California, what are the traits that are important to you guys? What do you want to know when you get those EPDs? That's the first question I have for you. The second follow-up is, on that list of new rams, or sires, we'll refer to them since this is an official genomic conversation, of those sires that you have, how many of those are even brothers? They might not even be half brothers or even quarter brothers, right? I mean, if you go back in that pedigree 12 generations, they're probably the same. But right there, when you got to your AI thing, I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. So what are the tools you want? And is it AI needs to come before genomic predictors, or is it genomic predictors come before AI?
Okay, you just asked me like 15 questions in 1 minute, so let me do my best.
Come on, I'm not that.
In answering these, I think I'd like to back up a little bit though, because like I was talking to Ryan before we started this whole deal, and this is a conversation on genetics. But when looking at the sheep industry, like I feel like there's so much potential in just the proper management of the sheep that we have, and with the end goal being increasing your production and or efficiency, and that right there, to me, number one, you need to have a benchmark of where you're at as a producer in order to be able to even see where you want to go. And until you get that benchmark and know where you want to go, you can't make any genetic decisions to bring you towards that goal because you don't even know what it is or where you're at. And I think even on the cattle side, sometimes you'll see people that don't have, or producers that may not have as good a handle on where they're actually at, buying bulls, like you had mentioned earlier, that could possibly be even taking them backwards. And to build on what Ryan was saying, that data we got back this year was absolutely fantastic, but it's all performance data, and it's not a comparison to what else is out there and what the opportunity is elsewhere to bring in genetics that'll boost that even further. You see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
and so, I mean, honestly, here at Amy Livestock, before we could even really start pushing the genetic side of the sheep, we had to go in and be able to manage our sheep. For us, that meant EIDs and a hardware system to manage input and output and retrieving of data. And that's been the most important thing out of probably anything that we've done here since I've been here. After we had that, the ability to manage our sheep and our data in a way that was usable, then we went and we said, okay, what traits are important to us? What we came up with was wool quality, foot rot resistance, and fertility. Now, I'm giving you the short list because, as Ryan knows, we came up with like 50 things when we first started this deal.
65, I think.
we wanted to track everything under the sun, and logistics in reality hit us in the back of the head, and we just hyper-focused on these three things. And, you know, we didn't choose these things because we had the greatest opportunity necessarily for increasing them. We did. We happened to have a great opportunity for increasing them. We chose them because we thought they had the greatest chance of returning value to our operation. And like the correlation I'm trying to make is like, as a cattle producer, if you are a cow-calf producer selling at weaning, why are you choosing to buy a bull based upon carcass traits? You know, that's the biggest example I could throw out there right now. You should be focusing on fertility, on feet, on calf vigor, mothering ability, heifer pregnancy, if you retain replacements, things like that. So, you know, from our perspective, we looked at what's going to have the most return for our buck here on managing, these animals. And so, like I said, wool quality, foot rot resistance, and fertility. What I would add to this that we could really use in the industry right now is a lamb vigor score for different sires. And I mean, and that varies by breed as well. Like we see the heterosis in our crossbred lambs. Those lambs are hardier, but they're also bigger at birth for the most part. But there's a lot more vigor in than compared to our straight bred white-faced lambs. The other thing is mothering ability. We've purchased ewes from outside sources in the past, and some of them were horrible mothers compared to ours, but then some of them were really, really good. I mean, to the point where I was questioning, almost what we were doing. They were that good of mothers, raising, triplets with no problems, plenty of milk, all these things that you look for. And the reason that I gravitate towards those two traits is because you want live lambs, and in order to have a live lamb, you need one with some vigor, and the mom's got to take care of it. That also reduces your labor you're putting into these lambs in order to get them shipped. And so to me, those are kind of the most, if I had to pinpoint valuable traits. What would you say, Ryan?
Everything you said, but I would also throw in longevity.
Yeah.
But
stability.
It takes time to figure out longevity.
So I'll tell you guys, I mean, since this is a genetic and genomic thing, and again, I'm so good at throwing curveballs, I apologize to your listeners. If we think about gene interactions and how things work, there are very few things that affect birth weight. It's basically environment of the cow's uterus, and then the genetic potential to reach a certain weight, right? I mean, it's the actual, birth weight, weaning weight, and yearling weight are all the same thing, just taken at different points of the animal's life. It's what the growth potential is. And there are what they call curve benders, but usually it's just something that has gestation length differences or something like that. But those are relatively easy to measure. We can come up with an EPD for that. I think most scientists would tell you, if you just went out with your ewes and you just measured birth weight, you could figure out an EPD or an EBV for that. When you get to things like fertility, lamb vigor, longevity, mothering ability, those are rather complex traits. And in Angus, those observations are called heifer pregnancy. Milk would be one. I'm trying to think of other ones. Docility is another one, because that you don't take into account the management and stuff. But what's interesting is genomics do a phenomenal job of finding those difficult to identify traits. And if you can have phenotypic observations, which you can still have on docility, this one tried to kill me, this one didn't, and you feed the system and continue to look at those genes, there's a lot of value there. Now, back to the sheep thing. Are there people even recording data like the seed stock producers? Would they have data on twins versus singles? Because I would think that would be useful to know for big producers too, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, but and fecundity has been a big buzzword and a big deal in the sheep industry for a long time. But as far as what I'm seeing from just our year-to-year production, whether we're in a drought or not, on our operation anyway, that fecundity seems to have more to do with the body condition of those ewes at breeding time, the feed they were on, the weather, kind of the flush, more than it even has to do with genetics, in my opinion. I mean, you have to have the ability to produce those offspring, and those multiple offspring, but the environment has such a great impact on that. And back to what you were saying a couple seconds ago, though, all that genomic, all this data is only as good as the information that is supplied. And so to me, one thing I did want to touch on is you have to have a seed stock producer who's willing to work with you and has the same management goals you do, because what you're doing when you buy those animals in is saying, I want my herd to go in that direction. And so the direction of your seed stock producer has to be the direction you're going. And, to go to a sale and pick a few that will work for you, but if the majority won't, you're at the right sale. I mean, that we go to seed stock producers where we would feel comfortable leaving with almost any animal at their sale, knowing that it's going to bring us in the direction that we're looking to go in, and we can trust that seed stock producer to be raising those animals the way that we're going to be raising ours, or even harder in some cases. So.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, I've said that about, I would hope that the people, as a seed stock producer, the people that we do business with, we should be able to galvanize that relationship over time to where those folks could just say, I need a heifer bull or I need a cow bull. And that's it. That's the only thing they need to really dive into, because they will trust the genetic trend of our entire herd. Do I think we're entirely there yet? No, but that's what we all keep breeding towards as breeders. So is it possible to dive too much into the science and too much into the data? And that's probably a question you should ask me. But I mean, can we get paralysis through analysis, Jeff? You had 65 traits you guys were going to monitor through your new air pneumatic squeezer thing. And now it's like, let's just figure out if they're alive or not, right?
No, I mean, absolutely. But I would say that the traits we narrowed it down to for our operation and for our marketing goal, they work. I mean, we do, we have a marketing plan for our wool that requires quality wool. Foot rot for us historically has been a large issue, like to the point where we're trimming almost 100% of our sheep. And we've brought that down considerably. I think this last year we were around 25%, roughly. So, and then fertility, I mean, we're preg scanning our ewes right now, and I just am blown away by the fertility that we have in our ewes. Now, we didn't go out and buy a bunch of bucks based upon, their interpreted fertility. That information is not even available like it is in the cattle side, where you can search for sires with good heifer pregnancy numbers. But what we did was we looked at our sheep, and we made production decisions that shrank our lambing season, and we were really hard on these sheep. They had to fit our window and work for us.
And just to jump in there on that, you can correct my numbers, but this is a great example of how you use data to make informed decisions. So we looked at our pregnancy information from the previous 2 years. This was before last breeding. We looked at that information and we said, if we go to a 75-day lambing window, we will lose 15% of our sheep. And so then we did the math and we figured out the labor costs of lambing in a 180-day window versus a 75-day window. And then just some of those external problems on being able to mark your cattle on time during windows when it's not raining. This last year didn't matter because it never rained, but normal year. So we were able to look at all that. And we made our decision to do it. And I believe that was the number. It was like 15-16% is what we anticipated losing. We preg scanned. We moved to that 75-day window. We lost 13%. We ended up this year we came back around and now we're preg scanning now, and not to jinx it, but we're preg scanning over 90+% within the first 45 days of that 75-day window. So we've gone from this stretched out 180-day lambing window to a 75-day window with almost 90+% of the sheep lambing in the first month.
Yeah, we're almost 95% right now.
So it's amazing the efficiency from a labor standpoint and inputs on that for our type of operation, but how we were able to look at the data that we built and then figure out about what it would do and have it do exactly that. And so it really is proved out of value. And that's just on the EID on this small sample scale. Now, if you take that and you put that in these feedstock producers and they start collecting this data and they get it in the NSIPs, and then we can look at their numbers and we can make breeding decisions based on these breeding values. We can, it's a provable thing. It's going to work. It's just a matter of the buy-in.
And Joe, we're like one of the numbers where we really saw it this year, this being like the second 75-day lambing window that we've adhered to, is in our yearling ewes. So last year at this time, my long yearlings preg checked at 45% bred, which is not good. We had some low-hanging fruit there. But this year, they preg checked right now 80% bred. That's with 2 years at the 75-day window. First year was 45, now we're at 80. So, I mean, to get those replacement females up to that point that quick, I mean, and a lot of that has to do with utilizing the IDs in the management system just to sort the fertile, good-footed ewes into our maternal bunch that's going to be bred back producing these females. But it's just really, really, I mean, I can't express how much I feel like the value is in just knowing where we're at and where we are now.
Well, and the value of if we could then go out and buy a ram with EPVs to complement that, to drive that number further, it just, the amount of effect it had on us in one generation on our ranch. I mean, imagine 5-6 generations out what that can look like, from a production standpoint and efficiency standpoint. And with the raising labor costs in California, you have to be efficient. That's the only way we're going to survive.
Absolutely. And I think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Nope, you go for it, Joe.
No, what I wanted to tell you, I have this table here that I printed off, and please understand that there's difference in management. Time has changed. I understand all that, but I have a table, and it's the Angus Association's basically their performance data program. It's called the AHIR, and I don't know it's Animal Herd Improvement Records, maybe. And sure, that's what it is. You bet. I have the records from 1972 down to 2019, and it's really fun to look at the difference in weaning weight. First, we'll look at birth weight. The average birth weight of bulls submitted to AHIR in 1972 was 69 pounds. In 2019, it was 79 pounds. So we increased the birth weight by 10 pounds on Angus cattle in, how many is that, Jeff? Quickly, 50 years? Close to? Is that about 50 years? 72 to 19 is 20 and 30. Yeah, about 50 years. Right?
48.
Yes. Okay. And then if we look at weaning weight 477 to 652. Then we extrapolated out to yearling weight, and the average yearling weight turned into AHIR in 2009 or 19, I'm sorry, was 1,159. The average yearling weight turned in on bulls in 1972 was 847 pounds. So Ryan, that difference, I went to Calaveras High School in the foothills, but my quick non-Common Core math tells me that's 312 pounds of difference. For an outfit that sells mostly cattle at yearling, that amount of improvement is staggering, right? If we could even get close to that, and like I said, I mean, and that's when our AHIR program started, I believe, and that's what I'm going to guess by the data that they're showing here, and obviously don't take that to the bank, but that incremental change is incredible. It's almost a 50% increase. And if you could get that kind of production with the same amount of input costs in your operation, that's hiring another manager. That's taking a vacation with your kids. It's sending your kids to college if you want to. It's buying that new tractor. It's all the things that with the same resources you have, maximizing the potential of your herd. Now, I have found, obviously, and we can get into that in this next segment if you want, Jeff, bringing this back to reality and still being a sheep man and still being a cow man about this and understanding your environmental constraints. But without measuring and without a robust data collection system, it's very, very difficult to make this kind of improvement.
Well,
and I go ahead.
You also need participation in that system. And the participation in that system on the cattle side has been driven by the economics of putting pencil to paper and seeing what you just expressed to us. But the seed stock producers are also seeing, the benefits of them taking the time and putting the money into the data collection, and on the labor side, the cost of extrapolating all this data from their live animals, being a member of the breed association, and all the extra costs that go with just supplying an animal that has these production records. So a barrier, I would say, on the sheep side that's held us back is that, we have a wide range of production of different ways of production. So let me get into this. Most sheep are raised in a Western range application. This is large open range with sheep herders, not non-fenced open range, maybe BLM lease, that type of thing. Amy Livestock personally runs under fence. And so we have set acreage on our ranches, and we have to manage those animal units for what the ranch can produce and rotationally graze to increase our forage production. That's a whole different management system than the guys out there that are running just a head count and have as much feed as they want. They're just moving to the feed. Now, take it a step further, you have folks in the Midwest that are running under confinement, complete confinement. And so what we've seen in the sheep industry is that Midwestern kind of operation has been quicker to utilize this data that's being submitted to the different breed associations and NSIP, in partly because producers in their area are operating under confinement, and it's easier for them to collect the data, like you were talking about, the smaller flock size being a little bit easier to produce, those seed stock animals. So we've seen that kind of grow in that area of the country, but to expand that across the whole country is very costly. And when these guys are making $700 on a yearling ram versus $16,000 on a top end bull, it is a little bit, the economics have to even out. But as a producer, we have to see, we have to recognize that low hanging fruit and see where these sires can come in and improve our operation, and make us money. And therefore you can pencil in maybe paying a little more to get this production data. But I think that's kind of been a big barrier on the sheep side.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up because you brought up the $16,000 bull versus the $700 ram lamb. And I'll tell you, Jeff, that we are right at the threshold of Bruin Ranch of where can we afford to collect more data? And you might think that's crazy, but on 19 different points of data, it's like when the foot EPD thing came out, we've been screaming for foot EPDs, and we've been screaming for our association to get a hold of that because we all know that there are concerns there as we move to more of a straight bred Angus type herd or straight bred English type herd of cattle nationwide. That's something we're going to have to continue to shore up, so to speak. Foot EPDs come out and it's like, oh man, now we have to bring another time to bring cattle through the corral and evaluate them. And for us with a 300 cow herd, it's not that big of a deal. But for some of the bigger outfits, when you have to hire day labor and you have to sort those off, and maybe there's pairs involved and you have decreased performance or sick calves or any number of things, data collection is extremely expensive. And actually, somebody had mentioned something to me about ingest, understand, but about udder scores and teat size. I've been taking those observations in a data management software program that we have, and it's not a phenotype recognized by the Angus Association right now. But I've been taking those phenotypes for 15 years on 300 cows. At one point, we were up to 500 cows. And somebody mentioned something about helping develop an EPD. And ingest, I said, that would cost a lot of money because that data is worth something to me. I mean, it's worth something because we've taken the management hours to log it in. We've taken the time to have the crew evaluate those things. And the flip side of that, the positive side, is that's a benefit that our customers have, is they have that robust data that we've been collecting on those phenotypes that is our, I don't know how to say the right word, but it's like a captive supply of data that we have that we're very proud of. And I think that if sheep producers were perhaps rewarded for more data, it would eventually come. Is that fair? Or maybe it wouldn't. I mean, if you offered a guy $100 a ram lamb more, if they had sire parentage and some sort of data, would they start doing it, Ryan? Or would they still say, that's too much of a pain in the neck?
I think it depends on the seed stock producer and their operation, how they run their rams. But that's what we've transitioned to. We're very happy to pay what we need to pay to get the rams we want. And I think you see that in the Montana wool growers they have the Targhee sale every year, Montana ram sale, and they do a phenomenal job putting out information and data on these sheep. And the best data brings more money. It brings good money. The Wyoming does a ram test in their sale every year. The real good ones bring good money. And so I think it's there. It just takes time. And I know one of the biggest problems, especially like in the Suffolk side of things, if you got a large Suffolk producer, like, I don't know what, 200 head, 300 head?
Yeah.
You got a 200-300 head Suffolk producer, they would become the industry average when they decided to submit their data. Because there's that little data in the bank, so to say. So if you need 10 of those guys to put in, so you get that even read. If you get one guy that decides he's going to put it in the NSIP, he's just going to move the average, and he's not going to stand out. So his better ones will, but he's creating the average because there's not enough in there. And he may have the best rams in the country. He may also have the worst rams in the country. But either way, he's going to move that average.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the biggest problems I also see with utilizing the current NSIP system. The way it's designed is fantastic, but we need to have wider adoption of it in order to have it, have the greatest accuracy we could possibly have. And I can understand why, as a seed stock producer, with any sort of large numbers, you'd be hesitant at submitting your data and putting up the money and becoming the average, and the other thing I've argued against with other producers is I've heard stories where, we bought 2 NSIP rams and they were horrible and died, within 2 weeks. Well, okay, where are you, a Western Range operation that bought these from a confined operation in Minnesota and expected them to live out in, the Utah desert? Or?
Just because you buy animals with numbers doesn't mean you bought an animal with good numbers.
Exactly my point. Exactly. So that's an issue we have. But I mean, as more, like I said, I mean, I feel like as more people get kind of signed on to this and encouraged by their customers to sign on to this program, the data will build, the accuracy will build, and it will be better for everybody around. It's just a matter of creating the environment for adoption.
I think it's very, it's absolutely 110% what the industry needs, but that those first guys through the doors are going to get the arrows, and nobody's willing to take the arrows yet.
Yep.
The big seed stock producers.
So I'll tell you this though, and hopefully you have a bunch of big seed stock producers of sheep listening to this podcast, because the same guys that are going to take the arrows are the same guys that are going to set the standard, and they're going to move the needle, and they're going to be the head of it when it all comes to fruition. The EPD thing and genomics are going to come with sheep, and I think it's going to probably get driven by a couple of things: cost of labor, cost of land, and then also the retailer demanding it in some form of consistency. And then that feedback always ends up going back to the seed stock producer. But I will reassure you and say that those who are on the front end of early adoption, well, you will take the arrows first. You're also going to reap the largest reward because you'll be ahead. And so that's why at Bruin, we've always adopted good, sound data. We've taken it with a grain of salt and made sure that there was actual production applicability applied as well, and make sure that those cattle still do what they're supposed to out in the country. But yes, we early on adopted feed efficiency testing and just to create more data to draw from within our herd and be able to understand the direction our herd is moving. So Jeff, I mean, we've been talking about all this exciting data and stuff, and I'm just curious because you think big, and I admire that about you, and really abstract at times. Do you think we'll ever be in a spot where you won't have to go look at the animal? You won't have to go look at his mother. You just look at some numbers and sit in your desk and drink coffee and sit next to George Bush and pick out your rams?
No, I really don't. To me, well, as you know, I don't buy bulls without looking at their mother the same year I buy the bulls. I want to make sure I know how old their mother is, what her offspring's ratioed. You know, I want to look at her structure, her feet, all these things. And those are important to me because we're specifically buying bulls to raise replacements for our herd. So those are the traits that matter most to me. But so to me, the most important pieces are phenotype and production data. And you have to balance that with the use of EPD in order to compare a specific animal to the rest that are available, right? And along with pedigree, and I've learned a lot from our conversations in regards to, how you can basically look at a pedigree and make a very educated guess on how that DNA is going to play out in their offspring. And so you can, like you said, you can glean a lot from these numbers, from the pedigree, from the EPDs, the genomic data. But, unless you go out and see that sire's back right foot twists out a little to the right, or, he's a little sway back, there's just so many different factors that, depend upon phenotype. And as you know, when we go to sell our animals, I mean, phenotype matters more than anything almost. If your cattle look good, they're going to sell for a good, a better price than something that may have even more performance packed into it. It really doesn't matter because yours looks better. So, I mean, I really do think that you need to use the EPDs and the genomics as one piece of your management, selection.
And I agree. And I think that it was smart what you said about balancing EPDs with phenotype, because while I know the Bruin Ranch cow herd better than anybody in the world, I also know the whole story that goes behind them. So on one instance, I know all the good. And then in other instances, you can have your breeder bias that makes you want to see something in that animal that's not there. And sometimes by using that balance of EPDs or genomics, or the combination of all three, really, we can keep ourselves grounded in our breeding decisions and making sure that we're producing superior animals to go on to our next end user. That's always the goal. And so, I like that. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think we'll ever get to, first of all, we don't take enough phenotypes. I mean, that's the bottom line. If we took phenotypes like the dairy industry, which again, you mentioned before, why does the dairy industry have so much data they collect? Well, they're in confinement. They handle every single one of those things a million times. And it's easy to figure out pelvic length and stride length and hip angle and, curve and width of
Holstein while they're milking her.
Yeah, width of ribs and butter fat. And we have a lot of actual measurements we can take that in beef we choose not to because it's not economical to collect that data. But the breeder's eye can pick out a lot of those things. And on giant trends, I can tell you, like on this set of flush brothers, and when we talk about vernacular that some of the viewership may not understand, a flush brother would be if we superovulate a female, put the subsequent embryos into recipient females, calve those out, we would have a whole host of brothers and sisters, not identical, but brothers and sisters, like any of you listeners may have a sibling, that level of relation. Can they use those across thousands of cattle and have a very consistent calf crop that would do similar things? Yes, I think so. But there are going to be deviations, just like you may be different from your brother and sister. And so if we can use those EPDs and we can use those genotypic observations in the terms of genomics and couple those with our breeder's eye, again, I think that's where I keep going back to this term robust, but I can't think of a better term for it than that, is making robust, informed decisions, because especially in the West, it's been underscored time and time again that our land and our cost of production is getting more and more expensive all the time. And at least in cattle, every single one of them has to count. Every single one of them has to add value. And I think that you're starting to get there. You're starting to crest that knoll in the sheep production side of things to where, you know what, some of the lemons need to go away because your cost of producing that unit is a lot more than getting rid of her. And it used to be you could probably just run a couple open ewes or some that left their lambs or whatever. But when I hear about you guys and your clamp system and your employees and how you feel about your employees and your direction in terms of the corporation, I just think that every animal has to count, and we have to have the most informed breeding decisions on each one of those matings.
I think your point on the labor changes and expenses, we criticized in our discussion our 180-day lambing window that we have had at Amy Livestock for the last 70 years. That was absolutely the right way to go for the past 70 years.
Sure it was.
We got extra lambs. Labor was cheap. It was fixed overhead. Our guys were able to put in the extra. They were able to work 12 hours in the winter, no problem, no overtime. But here 2-3 years ago, that equation changed, and we could no longer afford to do it. And so I think it's really important to recognize that just because we're saying this is something we're doing now doesn't mean it wasn't right before and it's not right on a different operation. It's just that, right, we had this change happen in California over the last 5 years that just has really impacted everything we do, from gas price to grocery shopping to how we run our businesses.
So when we talk about how an industry drives towards making a change, I mean, the simplest, other than innovative ideas, is going to be economics, right?
Absolutely. But, I was going to touch on Superior Farms real quick, because they've been instrumental in promoting genetic improvement in the past few years. In fact, they even came out with their own, sheep genetic test, which is that Flock 54 at this point in time, which provides some disease resistance data. I believe there's fecundity data on there, and then you can use that test in order to sire match against your replacement females if you want to. As of right now, as I understand it, there's no phenotype like production based traits that are available, but the fact that they're even working on something like that, and the company has put the time, money, and effort into helping the sheep industry develop a tool to be able to utilize the genetics is a huge step. It has a long way to go. I mean, we need a lot more samples in the database, but it's just really neat to see a company like that take action to help better their industry.
So go ahead, Ryan. I'm still compiling my thoughts on that, but go ahead.
Quick question for you, Jeff. You mentioned, and Joe, you mentioned too, like when the foot scores, the genomic enhanced EPDs, you were against when they first came out, and now you like them. So to say, they're good, they're working, they're proving themselves out. How similar is that to NSIP and the fact that it's kind of, whatever you want to call it, it's new for the industry, it's at the beginning, because it's at the beginning and new, it's not as proven out, but over time, we're going to be sitting here in this office 10 years from now and saying, gosh, why didn't we do that 10 years earlier?
I think that is completely applicable. That's where, I mean, the more data you have, the more accurate it becomes, and it's really hard at the beginning to see, that it's worth it. But we've seen it in the cattle industry, without a doubt.
So I want to get to a question later that one of you guys can ask me about, have we taken it too far? But while we're on this direction, I just wanted to point out and underscore the parentage, the Flock 54 that you talked about that gives you sire and dam information. I wrote down, this is how change is made. And you're going to say, well, how's it going to make, when one ram sires 25 lambs or 35 lambs, how are we going to make change without AI? Well, I think some of that feedback loop might be Amy Livestock, for instance, finds out that all of these lambs coming through, the 25 that score at the top of their contemporary group are out of ram 163. And then the next year you submit it, and the top lambs again are out of ram 163. Well, pretty soon on his next trip to wherever Ryan gets his seed stock from, he's going to take 163 back to that breeder, and he's going to say, take your best ewe lambs, breed them all to 163, and I'll take every ram lamb from him. And then we bring those back and continue to use them. And we've seen some of that in the early adoption of EPDs with Angus. A lot of the greatest bulls in our history have come back from the commercial industry. In-bar emulation EXT would be one, and we all know the holes that he has, but the strengths definitely outweigh the weaknesses. And that bull was discovered by performing in a commercial operation. OCC Paxton, to the best of my knowledge, was the same way. Sold into a commercial outfit, kind of went away. Wow, this is incredible. Brought back into the seed stock industry, and he'd be the paternal grandfather of one of the hottest Angus bulls in the entire breed right now. So I think there is some real potential for growth. The first step is measuring. I mean, that's what we've got to do, is you just got to take the plunge and you got to measure. Does that make sense to you, Jeff? Is that fair?
That is an absolutely great point. Absolutely great point.
So I forget where we were going here, but it might have been some of the.
Yeah,
we're gonna do that.
Thanks, Joe, for that. We're at our management.
Did I just blow up the whole thing? We're done. Over? No. So have we gone too far? I've been critical in the past of genomics, and I've been critical of the EPD system in Angus, mostly because I feel like we're just trying to stack as many gnats on a pinhead as we can when we need to make the cattle better. Do I believe that the numbers are incorrect? No, I think the numbers are largely correct. I believe that our marketing of the numbers has kind of ruined them and desensitized their value and applicability to people on the whole scale. So do I think that an animal with 163 yearling weight will outperform an animal with 100 on yearling weight? Yes, I do, if given the feed resources to do so. But we're in a place right now where we're operating in so much theory and so many artificial environments that while we can stack those genes on top of each other for more and more and more performance, or more and more and more marbling, we don't have the resources to extract that difference. And so when you turn out those sires in a big scenario on Amy Livestock, there's not really that much improvement. What we need to do is create a more predictable baseline on those growth EPDs and take care of the things that make commercial cattlemen money. So it's really fun for me to explore how in the infancy the sheep industry is when it comes to EPDs. The Angus and the beef industry, but particularly Angus, can go backward and say, you know what, maybe we just need to apply some good stockmanship principles back to the great tools that we already have. Let's use that breeder's eye. Let's not keep flushing and in vitro fertilizationing, if that's the word, in vitro fertilizationing. I feel like we were a lot looser on the last podcast and we joked a lot more. But anyways, this subject matter is dry, right? In vitro fertilizationing, just barely pubescent heifers. I mean, heifers that have just cycled, that are having, by the time they have their first calf, they already have several calves on the ground out of surrogate mothers. We need to be able to turn around and go, what are we doing? Let's bring out some 12 and 15-year-old cows and fire those up, because growth is the easiest thing to put back on those cattle. Environmental adaptability and longevity are some of the hardest. And let's help evaluate ways to make positive change within our industry on EPDs and genomic predictors for longevity, because those are the things that make commercial cattlemen money. So if there are ever think tanks or groups trying to figure out how to incentivize more data collection in the sheep industry, man, it would be great to have a panel of commercial guys that have put on the Levi's, who've cut off their long guns because they left them on too long like most sheep guys do. I mean, that was a joke, by the way. It was a joke. Sorry, listeners. Have some of those guys there that can add a little bit of reality back to the system and not have the scientists get completely outer stratosphere, that we can make one that can do it all. Because sometimes in that quest to make one that can do it all, you can drive yourself into a non-profitable enterprise as well. And without profit, none of us are anything, frankly.
Oh, you're spot on. And I think that the sheep industry has a good opportunity to learn from Angus cattle in particular, in how the industry as a whole followed specific trends. A lot of those trends leaning towards carcass traits and growth traits, but inadvertently, other traits were affected, like feet infertility. And feet infertility are some of the most important traits a commercial producer needs to look at. And so, yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, in the sheep industry moving forward, we need to make sure as we start utilizing these EPDs, we're maintaining the core of a breeding herd, which is feet, fertility, stayability, those main traits, as we also work on production traits instead of, and learn from the Angus breed and kind of be a little more cautious as we chase after some of those traits that may benefit the next owner down the road and that type of deal. So.
Yeah, and I don't think you're saying it, and I'm surely not saying that that end user is not the most important. We want that family that's decided to go to the high end chop house to get the best rack of lamb that they want, or the best ribeye that they can, and to not have a displeasurable eating experience ultimately. But when I get back to stacking gnats on a pinhead, I say we already have a phenomenal product. Let's improve all segments in their own profitability so that we can keep those folks sustainable, because chances are that couple that's going to the high-end steakhouse, or I should say chop house, sorry, they want all of us to stay in business, because they believe that they're consuming a nutritious product grown out in the hills. It's grazed its whole life, or most of its life, and then it's become this really nutritious protein on the plate. And they want to keep our production here. And that gets us to another soapbox that I won't even start, but it's very in vogue sometimes for scientists to bring out the exciting improvements in genetics that we've had with corn, who only has 7 or 13 chromosomes or something. I mean, it's really small. They talk about improvements with the poultry industry, or the improvements in the hog industry. Those are incredibly vertically integrated and incredibly confined animals. And I think there's a lot of risk associated with that too. Sheep most mimic beef cattle. Really, they're ruminants. They convert forage into protein, and that is their gift. And we really need to make sure that, I agree with you, the sheep industry follows both the successes and then some of the issues that we still have to figure out in the Angus breed. And one of those would be regional adaptability, for sure. You're not going to have the same type of ewe in central Kentucky as you are in the Montezuma Hills of Rio Vista. It just doesn't work that way. But does Katahdin breed have a place? And does the Targhee breed have a place? And the Merino breed have a place? Absolutely. And can all of them improve? Absolutely. And I think that as long as we stay grounded and committed to our industry as a whole, and figure out how these new technologies fit within our industry, not replace current practices, I think the better it'll be for all segments of the industry.
Well, gosh dang it. Thank you, Joe. Well, that's pretty good. I think that's a good spot to end. You got anything to add, Jeff?
No, I just thank you for being a part of this, Joe. Beef man talking sheep. I really do appreciate it. So.
Yeah.
I tried. I hope I didn't fudge up my vernacular at all. I was trying to like throw you guys bones like rack and chop house, but my heart wants to go to steakhouse and ribeye most of the time.
One thing I was thinking just to add on to the end, because I like talking, but and not saying nothing, but one thing that's always amazed me about the lamb industry versus the beef industry is the quality of lamb as a finished product at such a young age. I think it's like 96% of lamb that goes through USDA slaughter is Choice Plus. They don't even grade Choice Select Prime hardly at all, because everything is just Choice or Prime. And it's off of grass, it's off of feedlot, it's off of everywhere. And so your plateability of that lamb, under 12-month-old lamb, is an absolutely amazing meat product. And so that allows you, when you're using this NSIP data, to actually start pushing some of those other traits that were in the beef industry. There's a lot of emphasis on marbling and carcass quality and those things, whereas in the lamb industry, the natural focus, because that meat is so well marbled naturally, the focus is going to be on more of these maternal traits, twinning abilities, disease resistance, foot quality, fiber, all those kind of things. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in the sheep industry to learn from the beef. And I just hope and pray we have the eyes enough to see it and learn from it, rather than just put our head in the sand and just work on sheep without learning from these other species that have done so much work and have developed these tools that we're now trying to use.
I think.
Yeah, and that just brings me down another path when you talk about the eating experience of lamb. It's like Angus was the same way. And this is what happens when you use your awesome genetic selection tools, the best in the world, and you turn them into marketing tools instead. And it's our own fault. I mean, if I'm going to sell a bull that is a 0.80 on marbling instead of one that's a 0.02, I'm going to announce it at the sale, and he's going to command a premium. Well, what that's done is it's driven this dialogue that there's some Angus cattle that marble and some that don't. And that's where I get to the stacking the gnats on the pinhead, is let's use this data for true genetic improvement of the traits that we need to prove, like you so eloquently said, Ryan. Let's not just focus on marbling at a young age with lamb. Let's focus on the traits that we're having a hard time measure right now that will affect our profitability. Boom, right now.
And I think Jeff touched on it earlier in the calf situation, and the same thing applies to the sheep. If you're going to sell your calves as a yearling to a feedlot, or if you're going to sell your calves as a calf right off the cow, and if you're going to sell your lamb to a feedlot guy, you really need to be looking at growth. You need to be looking at lambing. You need to be looking at maternal characteristics. You really shouldn't put too much credit on the marbling side. That does have a factor, but most of the buyers in the country aren't buying those calves because they have high marbling bulls. They're buying those calves because they're sourced right, they have a good condition, they're backgrounded right, they're on good feed, they're at the right age, and because you can make almost anything choice if you feed it enough for long enough. And I think that's really important for a producer that's going out and buying rams or bulls, that you understand the market that you're selling your product into. We sell a lot of our calves into a Wagyu market. We really don't need marbling in our Angus cows if we're going to be crossbreeding with Wagyus eventually, because you have it all from there. So you really got to understand where you're marketing into before you decide what kind of animals you want, rather than going to a sale and be sold on something and buying because that's what you were told you need. You need to look at your own ranch, look at your own cows, and buy what you need based on your own data and your own information.
To touch on that too, I really don't think the sheep industry is not reinventing the wheel here. You can look at Australia and New Zealand, and you can see that this works and has worked. And that's why they capture a good portion of our market, is because they were early adopters of this type of technology. Now, granted, that was probably because they had higher labor costs and more, restrictive regulations on their operations earlier than we did. And so they've had this gap in order to remain profitable. But still, all that data is out there right now, for us to use. So.
Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. I appreciate your time. We're clocked in. I think this may be the marathon episode of Sheep Stuff You Should Know. I think we're right at an hour and 25 minutes or so. So that's a good solid listen. But I really appreciate both of your guys' time. Thank you, Joe, for joining us again. Hope to see you again sometime. And Jeff, thanks for joining. And that's been awesome. So until next time.
Thank you guys for having me.
We'll see you guys. Take care.
Hey, see you guys later.
See you, Joe.
Bye.